The night is quiet. Too quiet. When most people are asleep, some are working, and some are witnessing things that can't be explained. Tonight, we dive into 4 true night shift horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. For those of you who have worked the late shift, you know the feeling. The silence of an empty building, the strange echoes down long hallways, the way your mind can play tricks on you in the darkness. But what if it's not just your mind? What if something else is out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for everyone else to leave? These stories come from people just like you, nurses, warehouse workers, security guards, who experienced something they will never forget. They thought they were alone, but the night had other plans. As the clock strikes midnight, we begin our descent into the terrifying world of the night shift. Are you ready? Just be sure to leave a light on. Our first story takes us to the sterile, quiet halls of a large city hospital. Sarah was a dedicated nurse who had worked the night shift for years. She was used to the quiet hum of the machinery, the soft footsteps of her colleagues, and the occasional late-night emergency. But one evening, something changed. It started subtly. A fleeting shadow in her peripheral vision. She'd turn, and nothing would be there. She dismissed it as fatigue, the play of dim lights and long hours. But the shadow became more persistent. It started to follow her. As she made her rounds, she would see a tall, dark figure gliding silently down the corridors, always just a few paces behind. It never made a sound. No patient, no staff, just this dark, humanoid shape moving with an unnatural grace. Her colleagues saw nothing. They told her she was working too hard, that she needed to get some rest. But Sarah knew what she saw. One night, the hospital was unusually still. A major power outage in the area had left them running on backup generators, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Sarah was at the nurses' station, catching up on paperwork. She felt that familiar cold spot behind her, the unmistakable presence of the shadow. She refused to turn around, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she heard it, a low, raspy whisper right next to her ear. It wasn't a voice she recognized. It wasn't human. It whispered her name. Sarah. In that instant, every light on her floor flickered and died, plunging her into absolute darkness. All she could hear was her own ragged breathing and the faint, chilling sound of something shuffling closer. Next, we traveled to the vast, cavernous expanse of an overnight warehouse. Leo worked as a stocker, a job that was both physically demanding and mind-numbingly repetitive. His shift began when the sun went down, and his only companions were the towering shelves of inventory and the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. For months it was just a job. But then the noises started. Faint whispers seemed to echo between the aisles, sounding like they were just a few feet away. He'd call out, thinking it was his supervisor, but he was always met with silence. Then, objects began to move. A box would be slightly out of place from where he'd left it. Pallets he had just secured would be shifted. Management chalked it up to vibrations from passing trucks or the building settling. Leo started reviewing the surveillance footage, desperate for an explanation. The cameras captured blurry, fast-moving figures that seemed to dart between the shelves, figures that were definitely not human and certainly not on the employee roster. One night, the activity escalated. Leo was working in aisle 7, stacking heavy crates. He heard a loud creak from aisle 9, 2 rows over. He peered through the gap in the shelves but saw nothing. It was completely empty. He turned back to his work, and that's when he heard a tremendous crash. He sprinted over to aisle 9, and his blood ran cold. A massive pallet, weighing hundreds of pounds, had fallen from the top shelf, smashing its contents all over the floor. It had fallen right where he would have been standing just a few minutes later. There was no one there. No forklift, no person, nothing that could have pushed it. The warehouse wasn't just haunted. It felt like it was actively trying to harm him. Our third story comes from a security guard named Mike, tasked with patrolling a modern multi-story corporate building after hours. His job was simple: walk the floors, check the doors, and watch the monitors. For the first few weeks, the only thing he had to worry about was boredom. The building was a ghost town after 6 p.m. But one Tuesday night, as he was doing his rounds on the 4th floor, he heard a distinct click. An office door down the hall, which he had just checked and locked, was now standing wide open. He secured it again, unnerved, and continued his patrol. But it kept happening. Doors opening and closing on their own. Elevators arriving on his floor with no one inside. He tried to rationalize it. Air pressure, faulty mechanisms. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The true terror began when he returned to the security office to check the CCTV footage. The monitors showed the empty hallways he had just walked. But then, on the playback for the 7th floor, he saw them. People. Silhouettes of men and women in business attire, walking the halls, entering offices, and then vanishing into thin air. He was the only person in the entire building. His heart hammered against his ribs. He rewound the footage from his own patrol, his hands shaking. As he watched himself on the screen walking down a corridor, he saw something that made him want to scream. Standing right behind his own image on the camera was another figure. A perfect copy of himself, watching him, a twisted smile on its face. Mike turned around in his chair, his eyes darting around the small security office. He was alone. But the camera showed he wasn't. Our final story tonight follows a long-haul delivery driver named Ben, who made his living crisscrossing the country on lonely, dark highways. The night shift was his preference. Less traffic, more miles covered. He was used to the solitude of the open road, with only the radio for company. But on a long stretch of desert highway in Arizona, strange things started to happen inside his truck. Small items on his dashboard would shift. The logbook on the passenger seat would be open to a different page when he glanced over. He'd hear faint taps on the glass of the passenger side window, even while driving at 70 miles per hour. He brushed it off as the vibrations of the road, his mind getting tired. One night, the feeling of being watched was so intense it was suffocating. He was driving through a particularly remote, unlit section of highway. Suddenly, he felt it. The distinct, warm, moist feeling of breath on the side of his neck. He could smell a stale, earthy odor. Every instinct screamed at him to slam on the brakes, but he was frozen in terror. He forced himself to glance over at the passenger seat. It was empty. There was nothing there but the dark, worn upholstery. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, and drove for another hour without looking over again. When he finally pulled into a brightly lit truck stop, his hands were trembling. As he unbuckled his seatbelt, his phone's light caught something on the dashboard. Scratched crudely into the plastic, in shaky letters, was a message that hadn't been there before. It read, "I've been here." The night shift isn't just lonely. It can be dangerous and inexplicable. From the silent shadow in the hospital to the unseen passenger in the truck, these stories remind us that some horrors only reveal themselves when the world sleeps. The darkness holds secrets, and sometimes those who work in it become unwilling participants in a story they never wanted to be a part of. So next time you find yourself working late, surrounded by the silence of an empty building, listen closely. You might hear the whispers. You might see the shadows. And remember, you might not be alone. Which story terrified you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and try to get some sleep.